The first complaint came in the form of a neon orange envelope taped to my barn door. That alone told me it was something from the HOA. Nobody else in rural Northridge would be obnoxious enough to color coordinate their threats. I ripped it open with a sigh, already regretting checking the mail before finishing my coffee. Dear Mr. Oliver Manson, it began, all official-like. We've received several community complaints regarding excessive animal noise emanating from your property, particularly from your bovine livestock. Please remedy this immediately or face daily fines. I muttered, what in the, and stepped out to the pasture. My cows, 6 of them, all Jerseys, were grazing quietly, the loudest sound being one of them sneezing. And that's when I saw her. Angela Reid, president of the HOA. Mid-50s, bleach blonde bob, always in some pastel tracksuit like she was going to a tennis match that never existed. She was standing on the sidewalk across from my fence, arms crossed, lips pinched like she'd bitten into a lemon and decided to commit to the flavor. Angela, I called, leaning on the fence. You seriously filed a noise complaint against cows? They moo constantly, she snapped. People have complained. Babies are crying. People are losing sleep. I blinked. The cows sleep more than I do. You're telling me they're louder than your husband's weekend leaf blower? She ignored that. This is a residential agricultural blend zone. That doesn't give you permission to run an animal concert out here. I raised an eyebrow. You mean a farm? You moved next to a farm, Angela. What did you think came with the pasture plastic cows? I've warned you, she said, pulling another envelope from her oversized purse and slapping it against the fence post. You've got 72 hours to fix the noise issue, or the fines start. She turned on her heel and marched off like she'd just delivered a court summons. I watched her go, the gears already turning in my head. See, what Angela didn't know was that I'd been keeping noise logs on the neighborhood ever since they tried to fine me 3 years ago for painting my barn too red. I'd installed sound sensors along my fence line to track decibel levels just in case the HOA tried something again. And if Angela wanted to play the noise game, I was more than ready. I spent the rest of the day combing through the data from my sound sensors. I'd mounted them discreetly on my fence posts over the past couple years, one facing the road, 2 angled toward neighboring properties, and another at the edge of my workshop, which sat closer to the inner neighborhood. They logged everything. Wind, traffic, birds, and yes, the cows. All of it time-stamped and labeled in a tidy spreadsheet. By dinner time, I'd built a 3-month profile of the neighborhood's average decibel levels. The cows barely registered above ambient noise. What did stand out was a consistent pattern of high decibel spikes early mornings, late evenings, and weekends originating from a few blocks down in the heart of the HOA board's little social circle. I cross-referenced the timestamps with footage from my perimeter cameras. One of the worst offenders? Angela's own backyard. Turns out her son had converted the garage into a recording studio, and from what I could tell, he was mixing bass-heavy EDM tracks at full blast every Saturday night. The sensors caught peaks over 90 decibels. Meanwhile, my cows topped out at 48. Once. During a thunderstorm. The next morning, I made a few calls. First to the county zoning office to confirm the property classifications and sound ordinances. Then to the state's agricultural integration program, which handled disputes involving farms in blended zones. Finally, I contacted the Department of Environmental Quality's Community Noise Division. They didn't usually get involved in small local disputes, but once I mentioned that an HOA was attempting to fine a state-registered livestock operation for existing, their tone shifted. Send us the data, the woman said. And if you've got recordings, even better. I uploaded everything: charts, logs, video files, even a snapshot of the ridiculous orange letter. By noon, I had confirmation they were sending 2 inspectors out that Friday. I didn't tell anyone. Let them show up unannounced. Friday arrived hot and dry. I was out behind the barn, fixing a busted irrigation pipe, when a white state vehicle pulled up beside my mailbox. 2 people stepped out, one tall, one shorter, both wearing khaki uniforms with Department of Environmental Quality patches. Mr. Manson, the taller one asked, glancing at a clipboard. We're here about the noise violations your HOA claims you've committed. I wiped my hands on my jeans. You're in the right place. Let me show you around. We walked the perimeter first. I explained where each sensor was placed, how they operated, and what I'd found. They listened, asked sharp questions, and took readings of their own. One of them paused at the edge of the property line, holding up a portable decibel meter as an engine roared to life nearby. "Where's that coming from?" she asked. I pointed 2 houses down. "That's the HOA vice president's place. He revs the dune buggy every morning, rain or shine." She noted it. "That hits 79, and that's from here." We continued to the opposite side of the property where the pasture bordered the sidewalk. As if on cue, Angela appeared again, holding a cell phone like she was expecting paparazzi. "You can't be serious," she said, walking straight up to the inspectors. "You're investigating him? He's the problem." The shorter inspector adjusted his sunglasses. "Ma'am, we're here to evaluate environmental noise levels in accordance with state law." She laughed sharply. "That man's cows moo all day. It's disturbing the peace." "Actually," I said, unfolding a printed chart from my clipboard, "they average 32 decibels. Meanwhile, your son's music peaked at 93 last weekend." "I've got the footage." Angela's smile faltered. "That's a private residence. You can't. State law allows noise monitoring for environmental impact," the taller inspector cut in. "Especially when a formal complaint has been filed. We're also reviewing public nuisance patterns, which includes HOA-controlled events." Angela narrowed her eyes. "What events?" The inspector flipped a page on her clipboard. "The HOA-sponsored karaoke night last month, the open-air movie in the park screening, and the early morning sunrise yoga with speakers series." I couldn't resist. "Those hit 85 decibels. My cows were quieter inside the barn." Angela's voice turned shrill. "I have every right to organize community events. That's part of our charter." "Sure," said the inspector, "but not above the legal noise threshold. Especially not without a permit. And definitely not if you're fining others while violating the same laws." Angela's jaw twitched. "This is harassment. He's manipulating data." The inspector raised an eyebrow. "We've reviewed his source files. The sensors are industry standard, time-synced, and calibrated. If there's manipulation, it's not coming from him." Angela looked like she was about to boil over, but the inspectors didn't wait. They continued their walkthrough, measuring sound levels at various property points, including the HOA clubhouse. That's when things took an unexpected turn. Inside the clubhouse, they found a wall-mounted sound system. Nothing illegal about that except the equipment was industrial grade, the kind used for outdoor concerts. One of the inspectors opened the cabinet housing the amp and narrowed his eyes. "Do you see this?" he asked his colleague. "No limiter. And this thing's wired straight to the outdoor speakers." I leaned in. "They use that for Friday wind-downs. Gets pretty loud." The inspector snapped a few photos. "This unit's over the residential wattage limit for common areas. And it's not listed in the zoning permits." Angela, who had followed us in, crossed her arms. "We installed that before the new codes went into effect." The shorter inspector shook his head. "Doesn't matter. Any retrofit requires inspection and reapproval. And there's no record of that happening." Her expression went rigid. "We're a private association. You're subject to public nuisance laws," the taller inspector cut in. "Especially if you're issuing fines for the very same infractions you're committing. This qualifies as selective enforcement." Angela's face drained of color. By the end of the inspection, the findings were clear. Not only were my cows well within acceptable noise levels, but the HOA itself was in violation of multiple state and county noise codes that included unpermitted amplification equipment, unauthorized events exceeding decibel limits, and repeated failure to notify residents of scheduled high-noise activities. But the real kicker came 2 days later, when I got a call from the state's legal liaison. Turns out the HOA had been collecting fines for years without reporting them properly. The money was supposed to go into a community improvement fund. Instead, it had been diverted into a private account labeled discretionary. They'd launched an audit. The next week, Angela's pastel tracksuit didn't make an appearance, nor did her husband's leaf blower or her son's nightly DJ sets. The HOA clubhouse went dark. The ridiculous orange letters stopped arriving. I heard through the grapevine that Angela had lawyered up. I didn't host a victory party. I didn't need to. The cows did what cows do: chewed grass, blinked slowly, and ignored the drama entirely. But I'll tell you this, for the first time in years, the neighborhood was quiet in the way it was supposed to be. And when I passed Angela's house and saw a for sale sign go up the following month, I tipped my hat to the cows. They'd won without saying a word. 3 weeks passed without a peep from the HOA. No letters. No petty fines. No staged strolls by Angela Reid with her clipboard of doom. The neighborhood, for once, felt like it was breathing. Kids played in driveways without being told their chalk drawings violated aesthetic standards. I even saw a neighbor repaint his shutters bright green, something that would have triggered a color-coded inquisition under Angela's reign. That quiet, however, didn't last. It started with a knock on my door just past sunrise. Not the polite kind, either, more like someone trying to hammer the soul out of the wood. I opened it wearing half a flannel shirt and a skeptical eyebrow. 2 men in charcoal suits stood on my porch. One flashed a badge that read State Department of Financial Oversight. The other held a thick binder and looked like he hadn't blinked since 1998. "You're Oliver Manson?" the taller one asked. "Depends," I said. "You selling something or trying to arrest me?" "We're here about the HOA audit. You were listed as the reporting party." That woke me up faster than espresso ever had. I stepped aside. "Come on in. You want coffee or just justice?" Inside, they didn't sit. They opened the binder on my kitchen counter and showed me a flowchart of transactions. Dozens of them. All traced back to a bank account under the name Northridge Community Enhancement Fund. It was supposed to be managed by the HOA treasurer and overseen by the board. Instead, it had been used to pay for airline tickets, spa packages, catered events, and most bizarrely a $3,800 community consultation with a company that turned out to be a shell LLC registered in Florida under a fake name. "Where's the money now?" I asked. The short one didn't answer right away. He just flipped to a page showing a withdrawal of $50,000 2 days after the inspectors left my property. "Gone," he said. "Transferred to a personal account belonging to Angela Reid. She closed it within 24 hours. I let out a low whistle. "You gonna charge her?" The tall one nodded. "We already have. Grand larceny, wire fraud, misappropriation of community funds, and failure to report taxable income. She's also under investigation for filing false code enforcement claims." I leaned back against the counter. "So she's looking at serious time. Possibly federal," he said. "Especially if we confirm she used HOA funds to influence zoning board decisions." That one caught me off guard. "Wait, zoning board?" The short one slid over a document, an unsigned draft of a proposal. It was an annexation plan that would have reclassified a 10-acre portion of land running behind the neighborhood, including part of my pasture, into a mixed-use development zone. She was working with a developer, he said. The plan was to push out the remaining agricultural properties by weaponizing nuisance complaints. Once devalued, the land would be bought at a discount and rezoned for commercial use. I stared at the proposal, the edges of the paper curling slightly from the morning humidity. She tried to bankrupt me with fake fines just so she could bulldoze my cows and build a strip mall? More or less, the tall one said. And you weren't the only target. 3 other properties were on the list, 2 of them already sold within the past year under pressure from escalating violations. I swallowed, a bitter taste rising in my throat. I'd known she was petty. I hadn't realized she was criminal. "What happens next?" I asked. "We've frozen the remaining HOA assets. A special master will be appointed to review all transactions. Residents will be notified of their right to restitution. And the board has been temporarily suspended pending a full review." I nodded slowly. "So the HOA's gone?" "Not gone," the tall one said, closing the binder. "But the people running it? They're done." After they left, I sat on the porch for a while, the morning breeze rustling the trees. The cows were still asleep under the shade of the oaks, undisturbed by the news. I envied their simplicity. That afternoon, a few neighbors dropped by. First was Hector from 3 houses down, used to be quiet, kept to himself. He brought a box of donuts and said he'd been fined twice last year for having a flat tire in his driveway for more than 48 hours. "She tried to tow it while I was out of town," he said. "Told me it was unsightly." I had to pay $300 to stop the process. I showed him the restitution contact the auditors left me. He took a photo of it and muttered something about finally being able to fix the transmission. Then came Vanessa, a single mom who'd been cited for unauthorized window coverings. Turned out her kids had taped construction paper snowflakes to the glass during Christmas. She told me they were a visual hazard, Vanessa said. My daughter cried when I took them down. I told her what I'd learned about the annexation plan. Her face turned pale. You think they were trying to force me out? I think they wanted your property in the way of their profit, I said. You were just collateral. By evening, a dozen people had stopped by, each with a story of their own. Faked violations. Threatening letters. Disappearing appeals. It was like a dam had broken and the flood of truth was finally washing out the rot. The next town hall was scheduled for the following week. With the board suspended, the meeting was set to be moderated by a representative from the State Oversight Committee. I wasn't planning to speak until I saw the RSVP list. Angela's name was on it. The day of the meeting, I wore my cleanest flannel and brought a folder of documents. Not legal papers, just letters. Dozens of them. Every citation, every warning, every absurd demand she'd sent me over the past 5 years. I'd kept them all, even laminated a few. The community center was packed. People stood along the walls. The moment Angela walked in, flanked by a tense-looking attorney, the room went still. The moderator introduced the session and opened the floor for public comment. I stood, folder in hand. I've lived on this land for 20 years, I said. My cows have been here longer than most of the fences in this subdivision. I didn't move here to start a fight. But someone brought one to my door. I held up a laminated letter, the one accusing me of violating the auditory serenity clause. This is what started it. A fake complaint about noise. What it really was a mask. A way to target anyone who didn't fit a vision for what this place should be. Sterile, uniform, profitable. I laid the letter on the table in front of the moderator, then added another. And another. Soon the table was covered. These weren't about community. They were about control. And now we know why. Angela's lawyer stood, but the moderator raised a hand. This is a public forum. Mr. Manson has the floor. I turned to the crowd. This place doesn't belong to a board. It belongs to us. The people who live here. Who mow our own lawns. Who walk our dogs. Who raise our kids. A murmur of agreement rippled through the room. I don't care if the HOA survives. But if it does, it needs to be rebuilt from the ground up. With transparency. With accountability. And without tyrants in tracksuits. The auditorium erupted in applause. Angela's expression didn't change, but something in her eyes flickered recognition, maybe. That the game was over. After the meeting, I walked home under a sky streaked with orange and gold. A few neighbors walked with me. Hector. Vanessa. Even old Mr. Feldman, who hadn't spoken at a meeting in a decade. We talked about forming a new board. One that actually listened. One that didn't raid funds or weaponize bylaws. And maybe, just maybe, one that appreciated the quiet kind of life that came with cows and wide open fields. When I got to my gate, I looked back and saw something I hadn't noticed in years. Smiles. Real ones. Not forced pleasantries. Not polite nods. Just people being neighbors again. And for the first time since the HOA ever sent me a letter, I finally felt like home wasn't something I had to defend. It was something we were building together. 3 weeks later, the first arrest came quietly. Angela Reid was picked up outside a nail salon 2 towns over. She'd dyed her hair dark and was using her sister's ID, trying to board a shuttle headed for the state line. The sheriff's deputy who cuffed her called me the next morning, not out of courtesy, but because I was listed as a primary witness in the fraud investigation. Apparently, some of the misused HOA funds were traced to a land brokerage firm with a history of laundering money through shell companies. Angela wasn't just siphoning off community dues, she'd been part of a property flipping scheme stretching across 3 counties. The local paper ran the story under the headline, HOA President Faces Grand Larceny, Fraud, and Conspiracy Charges. Her mugshot, no pastel tracksuit, no perfect bob, was splashed across the front page. Hollow eyes, grim mouth. She looked like someone who'd finally realized her kingdom was built on sand. But that wasn't the end. Over the next 2 weeks, 2 more board members resigned under scrutiny. One had approved suspicious landscaping contracts with a company registered to his cousin. The other had processed emergency maintenance withdrawals, totaling over $20,000, none of which had gone toward anything more urgent than a backyard kitchen renovation. When subpoenas hit their doorsteps, they didn't fight. They folded. The interim board, composed of volunteers from the neighborhood who had nothing to gain and too much pride to let this happen again, called a community vote. The bylaws were rewritten from scratch. No more unchecked fines. No more closed-door decisions. Every budget line item was now public record. And as for enforcement power, it was stripped clean. The HOA would manage pool keys and schedule block parties. That was it. But there was still one last thing on my mind. That annexation proposal. The developers Angela had been working with weren't named in the official charges, but a few neighbors remembered seeing unfamiliar SUVs parked outside her house last autumn. Blacked-out windows. Texas plates. One had even left a flyer in Vanessa's mailbox offering above-market cash offers for legacy properties. It hadn't felt sinister at the time. Now it reeked of something else. So I took a drive to the county planning department. The clerk behind the desk, a guy named Reid, no relation, pulled up the zoning ledger and scanned through the recent activity. There it is, he said, tapping the screen. Application to reclassify Parcel 8B as commercial mixed. Submitted under Timberline Holdings, LLC. That's your property. That application's dead now, right? I leaned in. He frowned. It was flagged after the fraud case broke. Frozen pending investigation. But here's the thing, the application was bundled with 4 others. If one goes through, it could still create a loophole. I felt a chill creep up my spine. What kind of loophole? If the parcels adjacent to yours get reclassified and sold, the county could declare your land non-conforming. That makes it vulnerable to mandatory buyout offers. I straightened up. Even if I don't want to sell? He nodded slowly. Them wanting the land is enough to make your life hard. I left with a copy of the filing and drove straight to the courthouse. The fraud case had cracked the door open. I was about to kick it off the hinges. I filed for an injunction against Timberline Holdings the same day. My claim was simple. The company had submitted fraudulent zoning applications based on manipulated nuisance claims orchestrated by a now indicted HOA board. I included the sound sensor data, the inspection reports, and the deposition transcripts from the state investigators. But I knew that wasn't enough to stop a developer with deep pockets. So I called in the cavalry. Hector turned out to be a retired Army logistics officer. Vanessa worked in public health policy and knew how to navigate bureaucracies better than most politicians. Feldman? He'd been a zoning commissioner 30 years ago and still had contacts buried deep in the system. We formed a coalition. Not just to save my property, but to block any future attempt to pressure residents into selling under false pretenses. We called ourselves the Ridge Preservation Committee, and within a week, we had over 50 signatures, testimonies, and a local attorney willing to represent us pro bono. The hearing was scheduled for a Thursday afternoon. I walked into the courthouse in boots still stained with pasture mud. Across the aisle sat a man in a navy suit with a tie so tight it looked like it was cutting off circulation to his brain. He was Timberline's legal counsel, and he carried a briefcase fat enough to double as a weapon. The judge, a sharp-eyed woman with no patience for theatrics, opened the session with a question. Mr. Manson, you're claiming the zoning applications were submitted under false pretenses. Do you have evidence? I stood and handed her a binder. The HOA fabricated code violations to devalue agricultural properties. Then they coordinated with Timberline Holdings to push reclassification. The board president is now facing felony charges for that exact conspiracy. Timberline's lawyer stood. Your Honor, this is speculative. The company acted on publicly available records. If those records were flawed, that's an issue with the HOA, not my client. The judge didn't look up. And yet your company submitted 5 applications within the same 48-hour window. All tied to properties recently cited for nuisance violations. All flagged in the same inspection report. He tried to object. She overruled him. The hearing lasted an hour. By the end of it, the judge issued a temporary injunction against any zoning changes involving my land or the 4 adjacent parcels. Timberline Holdings was barred from contacting any of the property owners directly or through intermediaries. The judge also referred the case to the district attorney for review under racketeering statutes. Outside the courthouse, reporters waited. I didn't speak to them. Feldman did. He held up the injunction papers like a trophy. This isn't just about cows or pastures, he said. It's about rooting out corruption where it hides, even if it's wearing a HOA badge and smiling for board photos. Back home, I walked the fence line. The cows grazed, oblivious to the legal war they'd inadvertently inspired. One of them wandered up to the gate, bumped her head against my arm, and blinked at me like she was asking if it was over yet. It was. Angela Reid pled guilty to financial misconduct and fraud. She avoided jail time but agreed to a lifetime ban from serving on any housing board and was ordered to pay restitution. The developers were slapped with a cease and desist and quietly pulled their applications from the county docket. The HOA, now restructured and stripped of enforcement power, existed only in name, a glorified party planner with a set of folding chairs. The neighborhood changed too. People started talking to each other again. Not just waving from driveways, but actually checking in. Sharing tools. Helping with projects. We planted a community garden where the HOA clubhouse used to be. The building was condemned after inspectors found black mold in the walls, a final parting gift from the old regime. And me? I added a new sign to the edge of my pasture. Not a warning or a complaint. Just a simple wooden post with carved letters. Quiet is earned here. No one complained. Not the cows. Not the neighbors. Not the state. And certainly not the new HOA chair, a retired teacher named Ellie who ran the group like a potluck committee, not a secret police force. Justice hadn't just been served. It had been homegrown.